Sophie entered Balmoral not just as Countess of Wessex, but as a symbol of everything the monarchy now needed: empathy, composure, and the strength to lead without noise. While Camilla's presence once commanded attention, it's Sophie who now draws reverent glances and subtle deference, a shift quietly noted across palace halls. The contrast couldn't be sharper. It's Sophie's rise, praised with grace and grit, isn't just public sentiment, it's a reflection of Charles's intent. By placing her and Edward at the center of this pivotal moment, Charles signaled that this wasn't about showmanship, it was about who could withstand the storm with dignity intact. What unfolded at Balmoral was the monarchy's most understated revolution. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. The breach by a journalist, exposing internal fractures, tested the strength of those chosen to hold the line. Edward and Sophie didn't just pass, they redefined what passing meant. Their appointment as guardians of the royal household wasn't grandly announced, but it didn't need to be. It spoke volumes about the monarchy's pivot toward inner trust, stability, and moral clarity. In a house too often shaken by spectacle, their quiet rise wasn't just welcomed, it was necessary. The gates of Balmoral didn't just open to welcome Edward and Sophie. They opened to reveal one of the most quietly dramatic shifts in modern royal history. For years, Balmoral Castle stood as a monarchy's sacred retreat. A place where titles were less important than tea schedules, where formality softened and the real royal dynamics played out far from public scrutiny. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. But this time, Balmoral wasn't just a quiet getaway. It became the epicenter of something far more consequential. Edward and Sophie, long perceived as supporting players in the royal ensemble, arrived to fulfill their first official state role at Balmoral. And it wasn't just ceremonial. It was calculated, strategic, a move designed to test more than just loyalty. It tested moral fiber, discretion, and who the king truly trusts as a monarchy teeters between tradition and transition. Because make no mistake, this wasn't a photo op. This was a loyalty litmus test. King Charles's decision to elevate Edward and Sophie during a period of mounting uncertainty, both health-wise and politically, says more than any formal speech could. Balmoral is now less about relaxation and more about reinforcement. Reinforcing who's truly aligned with the future of the monarchy and who is slowly being moved to the sidelines. For Charles, trust is a rarest currency, and Edward and Sophie are quietly cashing in. While others in the royal fold have drawn attention for missteps, power plays, or tone-deaf statements, Edward and Sophie have stayed the course. Loyal, unshaken, and, crucially, low drama. That's no accident. Their arrival at Balmoral signals the king's intent to restructure influence from within, placing emphasis on character, not just titles. And it's Sophie who's turning heads the most. She's no longer just the Countess of Wessex. She's emerging as something more powerful, a symbol of grace, of empathy, of steady leadership. The public has noticed. The media has noticed. And inside the palace, that hasn't gone down quietly. Photos, Sophie's presence is being felt, especially by Camilla. Camilla, the queen consort, is reportedly feeling the shift. The attention, the comparisons, the growing influence of someone who's never needed the spotlight to command it. That kind of shift doesn't just bruise egos, it unsettles hierarchies. Because for Camilla, this isn't just about personal pride. It's about positioning, influence, and watching it subtly drain away as Sophie rises without a fight. Create new folder. Prince Edward, photos. Meanwhile, Edward's presence is just as significant. He is not trying to rewrite royal tradition. He is tradition, quiet, loyal, and a model of unshaken support. In a royal family that's been rocked by everything from scandal to sibling estrangement, Edward represents the kind of consistency that now feels rare and valuable. That's why Charles's covert letter changes everything. In this internal communication, one not meant for public eyes, the king made it clear certain senior royals no longer hold his full trust. His restructuring, and not just publicly. Behind closed doors, the lines of influence are being redrawn, and the people being elevated aren't necessarily the ones with the loudest voices, but the ones with the strongest principles. It's succession politics. not through abdication or announcement, but through calculated testing of character, and Balmoral has become the proving ground. But the plan hits turbulence when a journalist manages to infiltrate this sacred royal space. That breach doesn't just threaten privacy, it detonates trust. Confidential information leaks, exposing the internal cracks in what's meant to be the most secure corner of royal life. And suddenly, it's clear, there are factions, there are leaks, there's sabotage. In the middle of this storm, Edward and Sophie, they don't panic, they don't retreat. They maintain the very thing the monarchy is struggling to project, composure. Their response, or lack of visible reaction, becomes its own kind of power. Because in a time when the palace's internal dynamics are under fire, quiet resilience becomes the most powerful statement of all. The public sees it, and for once, they respond not with cynicism, but admiration. Coverage shifts. Support builds. There's a noticeable turning of the tide towards a couple that never chase attention, but now hold it effortlessly. Edward and Sophie become symbols of a monarchy trying to find its footing again, grounded not in pageantry, but in something that's been missing, trustworthiness. Then comes the confirmation. With barely a whisper of media fuss, Edward and Sophie are formally recognized as guardians of the royal household. It's not just a title, it's a declaration. They are not being made kings or queens. They are being given something, potentially more important right now, responsibility over the institution's integrity. The title isn't performative. It's purposeful. It signals that a king doesn't just value appearances. He values guardianship, stewardship, the kind of moral and emotional labor that the monarchy must embody to survive the next generation of scrutiny. Photos, but don't think for a second that this move is free of consequences. Camilla's influence is clearly contracting. Her role isn't gone, but her dominance is no longer guaranteed. Internally, it stares her knees. The dynamics have shifted, and she knows it. Watching Sophie rise, slowly but assuredly, must feel like watching the ground shift under her shoes. And she's not the only one feeling it. This reconfiguration sets off a ripple effect. Inside the palace, loyalties are being tested. Subtle rivalries are taking shape. Influence is being brokered not in grand gestures, but in quiet proximity to Charles. And those once considered central to the royal brand, they are now navigating new, unfamiliar. But amid all of this tension, a new alliance starts to take shape. Catherine, Princess of Wales, sees the writing on the wall, and in true Catherine fashion, she plays it perfectly. Not loud, not performative, but deliberate. Her public gestures of support for Sophie, attending events together, projecting unity, aren't just for optics. They are strategic. Together, Sophie and Catherine begin to reflect a monarchy less focused on hierarchy and more focused on stability. A united front grounded in character, not performance. That alliance, quiet as it may be, sends a clear message. This is the face of the monarchy's next chapter. One that understands the moment. One that won't try to distract with grandeur while the institution struggles behind the curtain. Meanwhile, King Charles's health remains an unspoken but constant variable. It's not just about his immediate condition, it's about what happens next. And this shift at Balmoral may very well be his way of preparing for that inevitable change. His setting the table, redefining who's in the inner circle, making sure that when the time comes, the monarchy won't rely on status, it'll rely on stability. And that's why this moment matters. Because it's not about headlines. It's about groundwork. The kind of groundwork that doesn't show up in newspapers but reveals itself in who gets trusted, who gets tested, and who quietly emerges stronger than anyone expected. Edward and Sophie weren't elevated by accident. They were chosen, and not because they are flashy, but because they are consistent, unshakable, morally grounded. And now, officially responsible for safeguarding the household during one of its most vulnerable eras. This isn't just a role, it's a legacy in progress. And while the titles may not come with coronation robes or national celebrations, they carry something more enduring, responsibility for the future. A future that no longer favors the loudest voices, but the steadiest hands. What do you think? Is this the royal reset the institution's been silently building toward? Is the quiet elevation of Edward and Sophie the answer to years of instability? Or just another rearrangement in an ever-fractured royal machine? Let us know what you think in the comments. Like this video if you've been watching the monarchy's slow transformation with raised eyebrows. Share it with someone who thinks Balmoral is just a vacation home. And subscribe for more breakdowns of every headline, power play, and silent royal maneuver. Because in this monarchy, the loudest shifts are often the ones no one announces. Let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't just an appointment, it was a redirection. Edward and Sophie being named guardians of the royal household wasn't just King Charles handing out gold stars to his most well-behaved relatives. It was a fundamental recalibration of power within an institution that rarely changes unless absolutely forced to. But now, it had to. And why? Because the old model is cracking. The monarchy, still reeling from years of public disillusionment, can no longer rely on traditional symbols of power alone. Crowns, processions, and balcony waves aren't enough to mask internal fractures. Charles knows this. He's seen what happens when you put your faith in spectacle, when you assume lineage equals loyalty. And now, with his health under the microscope and internal divisions growing sharper, he's had to rethink everything. So he goes back to basics, to people he knows won't make it about themselves, people who aren't leaking to the press, people who don't see every royal engagement as a stepping stone to fame, people who stayed quiet, consistent, and frankly, overlooked for far too long. That's why Edward and Sophie are now holding one of the most symbolic and loaded roles in the entire royal system. Because in the age of post-glamour royalty, authenticity is everything. And this couple, they are authenticity. They are not posing for headlines or selling fairy tales. They are showing up, getting it done, and not demanding applause for it. And in a royal house exhausted by drama, But here's the twist, this revolution isn't public-facing. Not yet. It's happening in private rooms, in hushed conversations, in repositioned seating at state dinners. And yes, at Balmoral. That's what makes Balmoral the perfect backdrop for all of this. Historically, it's where real emotions have broken through the royal facade. It's where Queen Elizabeth grieved, where succession talks often took shape behind tartan curtains and stiff whiskey paws. Balmoral has never just been a holiday home. It's been the monarchy's emotional heartland. Now, it's where character is being tested. Charles didn't just invite Edward and Sophie up for summer picnics. He called them into the inner sanctum. And that covert letter, the one hinting at a lack of trust in other senior royals, that wasn't a whisper. That was a scream through velvet. A declaration that not everyone inside the firm can be relied on anymore. It was personal. And it was political. By elevating Edward and Sophie, Charles wasn't just rewarding past service. He was future-proofing the monarchy, placing long-term bets on moral durability instead of public flash. And you can bet that didn't go down well with everyone inside the palace walls. Especially not with Camilla. Here's where things get uncomfortably real. Camilla has worked hard, strategically hard, to secure her place as queen consort. And for years, that role seemed untouchable. But Sophie's rise changes the temperature. Not in loud or public ways. This isn't about explosive feuds or slammed doors. It's about silences, being left out of key discussions, having fewer eyes on you at events. That creeping realization that the quiet ones are slowly becoming indispensable. And that's what Camilla's dealing with. Displacement by proximity. She may have the title, but Sophie has something harder to earn. Public trust without public performance. Sophie doesn't have to prove anything. She just keeps showing up, doing the job, making no fuss. And in a monarchy battered by PR missteps and scandals, that quiet reliability is gold. CPW, Catherine sees it, too. And that's why Catherine's subtle support matters. She's not just being polite, she's aligning herself. With Sophie, with the future, with a version of a monarchy that might actually make it through the next few decades with dignity intact. Their alliance isn't showy. There are no declarations, but their appearances together are pointed. The coordinated engagements, the shared warmth, the unspoken message that this is what modern royal womanhood looks like. Duty without drama, power without ego. Together, they are forming a new kind of power structure inside the firm. One that doesn't scream for attention, but demands respect anyway. And all of this is unfolding against the ticking clock of King Charles's health. It's not just a personal matter, it's institutional. His reign, while relatively new, is already burdened by the weight of needing to stabilize, to secure the throne's image, if not its power. And that means making decisions that will outlast him. That's why this moment, this Balmoral shift, is more than symbolic. It's foundational. Because when the king starts removing trust from some and investing it deeply in others, everything changes. Not just titles or roles, but legacy, influence. Who writes the next chapter, and who quietly fades into footnotes. And the leak? That journalist who somehow infiltrated the fortress of Balmoral? That was a bomb under the table. Because it didn't just reveal information, it revealed instability. The idea that someone on the inside let that happen suggests that internal sabotage is real. That loyalty inside the palace is not guaranteed. And that Charles' caution isn't paranoia, it's survival instinct. In that moment, Edward and Sophie didn't just weather the storm. They became the storm shelter. Their response, or rather, their controlled lack of one, was everything the monarchy needed. Steady hands, no public rebuttals, no grandstanding, just silence, which in royal terms reads as strength, and the public noticed. Suddenly, people weren't asking what Sophie wore. They were asking what she meant. Headlines drew comparisons to Queen Elizabeth, not because of aesthetics, but because of poise. Sophie became the emblem of what many believe the monarchy should be: understated, composed, principled. It wasn't about outshining anyone. It was about outlasting them. And now, with their role as guardians formalized, Edward and Sophie aren't just participating. They're anchoring, holding the line as others scramble for footing, proving that sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who don't need to say a word. But don't confuse quiet for complacent. Their new status comes with pressure, scrutiny, expectation. Because while the monarchy is trying to present this shift as graceful, internally, the terrain is shifting fast. Power doesn't just move, it gets dragged, and there's always resistance. So while Edward and Sophie may now be Charles' chosen pillars, that spotlight comes with shadow. They are being watched by the press, by the public, by the very people who once dismissed them as background. And every move they make, or don't make, will be measured. Because when you're elevated as a moral center of the monarchy, any misstep doesn't just reflect on you. It reflects on the institution trying to heal itself through you. That's the weight they now carry. And yet, they seem built for it. After decades of being underestimated, they become indispensable. Not because they demanded a seat at the table, but because they made themselves impossible to replace. And that, in the end, might be the most powerful position of all. So where does this leave the monarchy? In flux. Still fragile. Still watching itself in the mirror, trying to decide which face to show the world. But with Edward and Sophie now holding symbolic stewardship over the royal household, there's finally a sense of direction, of quiet correction, of potential continuity. And in an institution that's spent the last several years reacting, that's a welcome change. Whether it holds, that's still to be seen. But for now, the message is clear. The future won't belong to those who shout the loudest. It will belong to those who endure, quietly, consistently, and with integrity. This silent revolution unfolding at Balmoral is a kind of moment the monarchy rarely allows us to see, but it's one that could shape everything that comes next. Edward and Sophie, once seen as a reliable but background duo, now find themselves at the center of a royal institution desperate to redefine itself. And what makes this shift so fascinating isn't just what is changing, it's how it's changing. There was no royal decree shouted from the balcony, no glossy rollout campaign, just quiet moves, strategic proximity, a secret letter, and the kind of subtle influence only the most secure figures in the royal ecosystem can carry. When King Charles quietly appointed them as guardians of the royal household, it wasn't just a nod of respect. It was a redirection of power, a recalibration of who gets to represent the values the monarchy want to project in this moment of global doubt. And while Edward has long been the silent support beam, loyal, non-disruptive, never chasing headlines, it's Sophie's rise that's triggering something deeper inside the palace. Because Sophie doesn't just represent stability, she embodies it. In an institution that's tried and failed to manufacture modern relevance through spectacle and personality-driven media optics, Sophie's approach cuts through the noise. No theatrics, no personal agendas. Just a calm, composed presence that people, frankly, trust. And that's what's rattling the palace. Camilla, Once the queen consort confident in her place beside the king, is now watching that position feel slightly less central. Her role isn't disappearing, but it's being challenged in a way that's hard to ignore. Not by defiance, not by rivalry, but by quiet public preference. Because while titles hold weight on paper, influence is shifting to the people who feel real to the public. And Sophie's grounded grace is being read as the monarchy's new moral currency. Inside the firm, these subtle changes matter more than any grand ceremony. Every seating chart, every whispered conversation at Balmoral, every misinvitation or changed itinerary, it all signals something. And right now, it's signaling that the institution's power structure is being rebalanced, not abolished, but deeply adjusted. And then, there's the breach. That leak from within Balmoral didn't just expose information, it exposed the monarchy's biggest vulnerability. That trust within its own walls isn't guaranteed. That even its most sacred spaces are no longer immune from sabotage. And the fact that this happened while Charles was already making quiet moves to shift influence, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like a warning. A warning that not everyone is on board with this new chapter. That not all senior royals are content with their roles being redefined or reduced, and that the tension simmering under the surface might be closer to a boil than anyone's admitting. But in the middle of all this, Edward and Sophie held firm. They didn't fan the flames. They didn't duck for cover. They simply kept doing the job, representing duty, symbolizing unity. And in that stillness, they spoke volumes. They became exactly what Charles needed, not distractions, but foundations. And now, with this new title, they become something even more crucial, the stewards of what's left, the ones tasked with preserving not just a family legacy, but the public's belief that the monarchy can evolve, that it can survive, not by being louder, but by being better. So, what now? The institution is still shifting. Loyalties are still realigning. And while Edward and Sophie may not be the kind of royals who dominate the tabloids, they may very well become the reason the monarchy endures. If you've been following this slow-moving royal reset, we want to hear your thoughts. Are Edward and Sophie the future of the firm, or just placeholders for something else? Does this shift feel authentic, or like damage control with better packaging? Drop your take in the comments. Like this video if you're here for the real power behind the crown. And don't forget to subscribe. We're watching every whisper, every sidestep, and every carefully worded title that signals where the monarchy is headed next.